Hi, and welcome to Career Mobility with James Mcilvena in July 2025. Hi, James, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you, TJ. Yourself?
Very well, thank you. Little bit chilly in this time in Australia, but yeah, we've got the heating on. We're all good.
Yeah, and fortunately, we invested in like these beautiful merchandised hoodies like last year, so I'm warm and on brand.
Awesome, I love it. Fantastic. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the key trends in career mobility at the moment. There's a number of different things happening, so I'm gonna we'll jump straight into it because obviously in this discussion we want to just talk about the things that are, I guess, top of mind, and certainly there's been a rising sort of job mobility in Australia. The rates actually hit 9.5 in 2024 and it's been growing. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this, James.
Yeah, look, I think it's been building for a while. So
Mm,
we've had and been involved in discussions on the requirement for greater mobility since I joined LHH. And it was happening before that. It was happening in my prior role at Commonwealth Bank as well, where people have been talking about the importance of mobility in
yeah,
order to be able to break the cycle of people having to exit roles that no longer exist, hit the job market, and then
yeah,
figure out a way back in. And mobility allows organizations to retain institutional knowledge. It's less stressful for the individuals involved. And so we've for quite a while been encouraging mobility and redeployment initiatives
yeah.
is the best way to deal with the increasing pace of change with the workforce. So 9% and rising, great, but 9%'s far from a pass mark. Still got another still got another 41% to go until I think we even get into pass territory. So there's a lot more work that really needs to be done here.
Yeah.
And it's not up to any one party to do it. It's probably a combination of employers, government, and mindset for individuals to be open to mobility opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting one as well because I think in years gone by it wasn't really kind of almost on trend to or sort of on brand to talk about wanting to do other things even within a business. And I think now it actually is that great sort of shift that we're starting to see where it's actually okay to talk about other things you might like to do within a business or even when I think of our organization within other brands within the organization to actually look at, as you say, how you can maintain that knowledge and actually share that throughout your sort of career journey because it's obviously great for the individual, but it's really good for the organization.
Correct. And if we think about the drivers of that, it's
Mm,
really only in the last 15 to 20 years where there's been such a significant drop in the average tenure of employment. You know,
yeah.
20 years ago, the phrase job for life or employer for life was actually considered more the norm. Now, with the increasing pace of change, there are very few.
Mm,
It is a very rare instance where people are in the one career. And also there's been generational change. So generations have wanted and valued, different things. But to your point, absolutely, there are differing opinions from both employers and leaders as to how open they are to that discussion. But it
mm,
is definitely a discussion which is on the agenda, and it's not limited anymore to the once a year, twice if you're lucky, performance cycle where people also probably pay some attention to a development plan and development opportunities. Now,
yeah.
actual mobility and a stated desire to want to move into a different stream and a more future-proof stream is actually a really valid conversation to have. And if you've not had that conversation or at least thought about it, maybe it's something you should be doing.
Yeah, actually, it actually makes me think about a discussion last month about future proofing. I actually think it is part now and parcel of that future proofing conversation throughout our careers.
Yeah, and what we're going to discuss today is A, why is it important, and B, what are some of the industry trends that we are seeing and noting
Yeah.
that will be a starter. I'll preface everything that comes by saying it's an individual journey for everyone, and that individual
Mm,
journey is based on that person's skills, their capabilities, the things they're interested in learning, the things they like doing and are good at, things that align to their values. These are all parameters that make it a very individual journey, but the ability to share some broader trends will be really useful to help people get started on that journey that is very specific to themselves and to their scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about. We're going to get into more specifics on the sort of sector side of things or industries a bit later on. But some of the sector shifts we've seen, and certainly I think COVID possibly would be part of the reason for this with the healthcare side of things. But healthcare, tech, and construction are some of the real boom areas we're seeing, and they're aggressively recruiting now due to chronic skills shortages. So what are your insights there, James?
So we've got a stated, well, clearly stated objective by the government to reduce pressure on house prices by construction. So when it comes to that segment, and that's just residential, there's huge demand there. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, we're restricting net immigration where there's going to need to be this balance of skills required in order to grow the economy. But then how do you actually house people in a reasonable way without creating upward pressure on housing for all of the people who are already here? So that sector is going to be hot. That's before you even get into all of the infrastructure build. And so I was reading an article this morning about every state government as well as the federal government are now running debt cycles because of their understanding of the importance to invest and continue investing in infrastructure projects. So that sector is huge. Secondly, healthcare. I said to you as we're starting this call, one of my dad's old expressions was, anything in medicine and healthcare is recession proof. People are fortunately looking after themselves a little bit better and focusing on preventative. So there's huge uplift in health well-being, preventative
Yeah.
medicine for people, but people are actually also living longer and are a greater burden on the healthcare system. So thinking about how healthcare will be delivered and the changes that will occur there. So that it's not there's no change in this system, but there's a huge increased demand and need, and there's going to continue to be increased demand and need in the healthcare sector. So
Yeah.
those are three, and then finally the technology sector. Again, it's the one thing about technology sector that we are seeing is that the requirement of people in that sector to understand where they're at today and how things are changing and where they need to be tomorrow to keep pace is probably the highest out of any sector at the moment. So the understanding of particularly skill set currency and positioning yourself and investing in learning to stay current is probably the sector that is impacted almost the most out of any when it comes to skills currency.
Yeah, very dynamic sector, isn't it? And we're seeing new sort of technologies and ways of using technology evolving. So it's pushing the boundaries of what people need to know and how they need to maintain it.
Correct. And with that comes a whole separate where individuals are being more demanding about how they're using it. But then there's a whole bunch of rules, structure, requirements, governance that sits around that as well when individuals are accessing things more freely, particularly when it comes to things around privacy concerns, things around cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So again, there's a whole sector there that is an emerging sector as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing then, when we look at sort of skill shortages and sort of those, that mobility needed, then we're talking about geographic flexibility as well. We certainly saw a massive shift in the way that we work post COVID. What we're seeing now is that there's a move towards hybrid and remote work, and that's now dissolving geographic barriers to where we work. Again, really interesting discussion. What are your thoughts on this one, James?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost at a fascinating point where it feels like there's divergent, well, it's been coming for a while, but now there's much more divergence on those, and it's not necessarily even sector specific. It's often
Mm.
organization specific when it
Yeah,
comes to people's expectations around, in office, out of office. Hybrid means different things to different people too. It's very different to have a 4 days work from home, 1 day in the office to 1 day work from home, 4 days in the office. Think about the
mhm,
dynamics of that, right? Whereas both would still be called hybrid working. Your question, though, around what it means for geographic locations, it does free up for employers the opportunity to look further afield, particularly for scarce skill sets. So it is a huge
yeah,
opportunity. If you're a scarce skill set, the ability to actually say, I'm going to work 100% virtually, there's never been such a high opportunity to be able to propose that to potential employers, even if they're not advertising. What hasn't kept pace is there's still a lot of traditional head offices in Sydney, so are going to put out an advert and just list Sydney, right? Um,
yeah,
Getting more open to the different geographic regions where skills do exist will evolve. But then there's the other side, which is the pushback to those people who have made decisions for a lifestyle reason, and all of a sudden they're met with mandates of minimum 3 days in an office and
mm,
spending ridiculous commute times. And now there's a lot of economists reporting about the fact that there is starting to become a distinct difference in even pay rates of those people who work virtually versus those people who work in the office. And the fact
mm,
that people are more than happy with that. They're happy to trade off, some salary for the benefits of flexibility. And there is also a cost implication to the benefits of not having to pay to head into the office every day. So
yeah,
it's really uniquely positioned. The takeout out of all of this is think about, again, it's that individual journey. Think about for your journey, for your skill set, what matters to you, what's your situation like, how do you work best, how do you learn best, and then how do you integrate that into your job search? Because it's much easier to be targeted on it than wait to ask the question of an employer and then hear what they've got to say.
yeah, absolutely. Another area is sort of government support for reskilling. We're seeing that there is definitely more available funding for these sorts of things. We know we talk about reskilling and upskilling a lot. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, certainly micro credentials and things like that we've spoken about as well before, and short courses, but these are things that are starting to be really supported so that people can make sure that they're learning. Of course, people have got access to LinkedIn Learning through our systems. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that sort of upskilling and this government support for reskilling?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say governments are doing it because they're completely altruistic, but they're not. They realize the actual social imperative of if
Yeah.
people are not able to get access and upskill, it then creates a greater chance of having people who are long-term unemployed. And data for years has shown that, the longer people stay out of the job market, the harder it is for them to get back into the job market. So the ability and the access to upskilling is actually a smart government initiative to be able to say,
Mhm.
let's try and we'll make sure that there's not a financial barrier, but you need to meet us halfway and actually invest your time and effort into the upskilling. I think to date, from the people I've spoken to, I'm far from an expert in this space, but the people I've spoken to, there's a general degree of disappointment in the take up. So
Yeah.
the offer's there, but the take up's not always there. And so that to us, when we're working with customers, says that the question of what's in it for me or the understanding of the importance of it personally investing time, even if the courses are free, to keep your skill set current or to invest in learning, it's not quite there yet for people. And I'd love to think we covered it in our last chat. People don't have to learn the hard way. So some people won't be doing an amazing job at it, but if you're listening to this and you're not investing anything in at least doing an audit of what have
Mm,
I invested in? Have I learned anything in the last 6 months? other
Yeah.
than just doing my job, other than things I've learnt on the job? Have I, because of an interest or because I know that it's a direction that my industry might be traveling, have I done any learning in the last 6 months? If the answer to that is no, then maybe it's the time to take a look at start small and doing something. And
Yeah.
whether that's a free government course, because I think it is a couple of thousand courses that are now, free TAFE courses. Numbers depend on which state you're in, but
Yeah.
there's a couple of thousand free courses that are government supported in TAFEs in most locations now. Plus, you've got all of the online stuff, both free and paid online stuff. So it's not difficult. The barrier to do it is no longer there. It's easy to access.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, on that note, we also wanted to talk about the trend of the strategic career moves, and really is about the more information you have, the more you can really be very clear about what type of mobility might be opportunity. There might be an opportunity. So that sort of data-driven career change is really now such an important part of what we do. Certainly for us, things like the LinkedIn group is, providing lots of data and information about what's possible. The job market insights report, lots of support in terms of understanding what's happening. What are your thoughts on this area of things, James?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is part of the reason why for our business, we've invested in things like Career Canvas to allow
Mm,
people to actually try and make sense of the intersection of what do I already know? What am I interested in? Where do
yeah.
my values sit? And then what are the market trends? And so those things coming together at least give you some guidance because in
Mm,
talking about the previous question on upskilling and reskilling, if you don't have a direction of travel, it's daunting. If you
yeah.
open LinkedIn Learning, there's last count 9,500 different options, but it's
Yeah.
probably more than 10,000 now, right? But that's daunting, right? If you don't go in with a specific objective, it's
Yeah.
very difficult. It's like walking into a shop with $1 million and not having a shopping list. Like you can spend your money anywhere and you're probably running around without a great degree of direction. So I think that the ability to find that intersection of your desires, your skill sets, and then marry that up to where the trends are. And then that's not a one-shot deal either. Then it's to continue to run that sort of self-audit of, am I sitting in the sweet spot? Is there a lot of job opportunity in what I'm currently doing? If it starts declining, then which direction is it traveling? Where are
Yeah.
the new demands? Where are the new pockets of demand? And then back to that well of, okay, so based on that, what am I interested in? Yeah. Would I like to be working there? And then what skills do I need to do to stay relevant to be applying for those type of roles? And getting that balance right will allow people to track that journey.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing as well. I think that, in the current market, there are so many more options. I mean, even in the way that we help people move through their career transition, the pathways are much broader now than they used to be. That whole idea of the squiggly career and people being able to try out different things is definitely part and parcel of what's possible now. And transferable skills, really taking those skills and sort of looking at, well, where else could I apply them, particularly based on where the growth trends are.
And as things become more automated, the skills required are more human skills. So
Mm,
they're less
yeah,
hard coded skills that need to be learnt because if you think about people can either use AI as a productivity enhancer, or there's now the introduction of agents, AI agents into workflow processes. And
yeah,
so if the skills that are going to be valued and continue to be valued are the more human skills, is a lot less have you spent 5 years perfecting this skill, at least in sort of the white collar, space. Have you spent X amount of years honing this skill? Now it's actually the human skills. And I would argue that the human skills, with a bit of thought, are much more transferable. So links to your point, it
mm,
then broadens out the level of opportunity. But the one thing which we see time and time again is if the individual can't articulate that transferability and how
Yeah.
they fit, then often it won't be seen on the other side by the potential employer or by whatever you're looking to do. It's really critical that you're very clear in your mind around how you articulate it. And also, back to our prior points, what you're actually doing to drive your ability to show an interest in that field, to acquire skills that make you
Yeah.
suitable for that field.
Yeah, I talk about it, James, as building bridges. You know, you've got to show how you're relevant to that next opportunity, and really show your passion. Like you say, those human skills that come across, tonality, all of those sorts of things, so important when you're actually articulating those source stories or star stories, and really showing and demonstrating, examples and experience of why you.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. And yeah, that is time very well spent. So there are two
Yeah,
takeouts for how people spend time. Um, it's understanding and research and the intersection of those and how that creates optionality or
yeah,
objectives for you that suit your individual, scenario. And the second part is if you're investing that time, then figure out what your marketing pitch, what you're going to say when the opportunity creates itself. Everything from initial networking discussions to actually formal discussions about opportunities, but being very, very clear around your narrative is going to be time well spent. So those two together are probably the building blocks for people who are trying to look a little bit more broad than actually just, I want to do pretty much exactly the same thing I've done for the last 5 years, just with a different brand.
yeah, absolutely. There's so much more opportunity now. So the final trend just to talk about is global mobility. So we saw this kind of come to a grinding halt sort of 5 or 6 years ago during the COVID process. Now we're seeing it to start to really grow again, and it's being talked about as a career development opportunity. That opportunity to sort of be in a different market, different place, using, as you just said, the research and relevance, and showing how you can add value elsewhere and really kind of use it as that career development tool. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, based on experience, I think it is always something that should be in people's kit bag to
Yeah.
consider. There's also a couple of cautionary things I've learnt through my experience over the journey. One is it is a big decision. So when you are looking at these things, making
Yeah.
sure there's complete alignment and agreement from if you've got family members, be that immediate family members,
Mhm.
so spouses, partners, children, etc. If that alignment's not there, it becomes really very difficult. Even if the initial discussion's there, if there can't be everyone settles well for the international relocation, people are excited about it. So that's step number one.
Yeah.
Back to your point, then the career component of it, absolutely. I mean, it can be a massive ability to give yourself much broader exposure, and particularly us here in Australia, where
Mm.
there are not that many, relative to a place like London, New York, there's not that many organizations here that are headquartered here that then
Mm.
have global exposure. It's actually often that Australia and New Zealand are where there is an office for a multinational, but they'll be headquartered in Europe or headquartered in the US. So it is a tremendous opportunity to get much broader exposure. But the only other cautionary tale is people who move and take an assignment and then want to move back can often be a difficult transition as well. So
Yeah.
absolutely consider it, but do your due diligence. First and foremost, make sure that the hygiene factors around family, how you're going to live, is their standard of living better? Get that right first. Secondly, understanding very specifically what extra exposure it's going to give you. So,
Yeah.
is it something that it broadens out your scope and therefore you've actually ticked one of those boxes we were just talking about? It's like a new skill or a broader scope
Mm.
that actually progresses your career. And then finally, think about if you do want to shift back, what does that look like? Because it is often a very tricky scenario to try and come back with the same employer. If there's not a role of that size and scope and breadth, you don't want to be going through all of that and just go back into your old role. So are you happy to, if you need to transition back, say, well, that might be with a new employer?
Yeah. And again, yeah, there's so many options. So we're going to talk now a little bit about roles that potentially in this market have a high mobility rate across Australia and New Zealand, based on demand, transferability, and also career progression potential. So the first one we're going to talk about, James, is, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, when comes to construction, but skilled trades and technical roles. So, that is just such a growth area. And as a surfer yourself, I know you see this from a slightly different lens. So I'd love to get your take on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think this is a segment that now has a huge investment both from residential and from infrastructure
Mm,
perspective.
yeah.
When you think about some of the trades that are now required for opportunities to work in manufacturing sector. So
Yeah.
South Australia is a perfect example of this, where they actually lost a ton of manufacturing industry, but
Mm,
now they're right back at the centre for some of the new defence initiatives that are going on. It's really, really hard to find trades in some of those locations.
yeah.
This is a sector and segment that people do particularly well in. It's very flexible, hence your comment about surfing. I was saying that very rarely am I out there where there's not like at least a couple of people who I hear talking, about their trade businesses. So
Yeah.
it's pretty flexible. It's now a really well paid profession, and the runway to the need and demand just seems to not be ending anytime soon. So really, really good growth sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And good opportunities also, I would say, for international mobility with those types of skill sets as well. Um,
And regional, like
yeah, yeah,
it's one of
actually.
those things where,
Mm,
yeah, even you don't need to leave the country. You can actually want a sea change, want a tree change, bang. It's like one of those things that's much
very
easier to do
transferable.
with
Yeah,
trade.
yeah, perfect. Second area is healthcare and allied healthcare. So, you registered nurses, aged care workers, physiotherapists, mental health professionals, etc. Big area on the rise.
Look, two things. One, always going to be, as we discussed before, always going to be
Mm,
a segment where there's going to be a need and growth. They're starting to. I don't think they have, but one of the things that has actually hampered it is a sector that is driven by people who are really passionate about what they do. And
yeah,
bless them. Everyone who's involved in that sector, whenever you need it, I think we all know, like, thank you. Um,
yeah,
What's starting to change though is it's starting to, because of the imperative, they're actually starting to properly look at pay and conditions. And that's a difficult road because particularly if it's government funded, but
mm,
there is opportunity, particularly when talking about allied healthcare and optionality within healthcare.
yeah.
It is one of those things where in the past it's been a passion profession. Now hopefully it's a passion plus a well-paid profession as well.
Yeah, I hope, like as you say, thank you to everyone who's in that industry, and absolutely that definitely needs to improve. So the other area is tech and digital. Now, this is an interesting one because we know that there has been a lot of displacement in that sort of space. But when it comes to things like cybersecurity and cloud engineers, there's a lot of opportunities for remote work, contracting, and freelance flexibility for these roles, but also cross-industry movement. So, what are your thoughts here, James?
Yeah, look, I'll pick back up on the point I made before, which is this is the sector that requires the greatest agility when it
Yeah,
comes to people's commitment to development. So, opportunity, absolutely. Growth, for sure. Not a great option if you're not willing to stay current, would be my commentary there. So, yes, you know, going to be huge growth in coming years, but also going to come with that requirement to be willing to learn, be willing to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one is construction and infrastructure. So different from the trade side of things. This is really more civil engineers, project managers, your quantity surveyors and site supervisors, even down, I would say, to the road crews. From a maintenance perspective, there's lots happening there always. Lots of career mobility in this space, supported by national infrastructure funding, regional relocation incentives, but also high salary growth as well.
Correct. I don't have much extra to add to this that I didn't cover with the trades before, but
Mm,
picking up on all your points, it is a high growth sector. It is a sector that is actually embracing diversity more than ever
yeah.
before as a sector as well. So
Mm.
I think it is definitely one to watch.
Yeah, perfect. The other area, business and finance, we know that these guys have always had to sort of upskill and reskill continually. Accountants, financial analysts, business consultants, etc. They're seeing now in this market, particularly startups and SMEs, looking for these types of skill sets, government and public sector, but also remote and hybrid roles as well. What are your thoughts here, James?
Yeah, look, they are the type of roles that can offer flexibility. Again, it really comes down to the employer, but
Mm,
it's also a watch out too in this sector because for some of the roles that 5 years ago were promoted as being really, hot segments to get into, very well paid, are now there's much more automation available,
yeah.
particularly through use of, AI and agents. So
Mm,
just make an assessment on two things. One, those that human side of these roles, that sort of
yeah.
analytics and comprehension of the data and the presentation of the data back with advice in a uniquely human way versus the more processing elements of the roles. That's where the growth opportunity sits.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final one is education and training. So always, obviously, very much needed. Everything from teachers to vocational trainers and instructional designers. But these, obviously, again, supported by sort of government upskilling programs and remote learning platforms, which we're using in industry and certainly in education, and then international teaching opportunities. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, look, so I think that almost everything we just said before about the upskilling, just it is common sense to think that there is going to be a greater investment in people needing to be able to access and learn new skills. And that's everything from creating online content to the sort of
Yeah,
in-person teaching roles. This is not the requirement for people to learn to keep pace in a world that is constantly changing and speeding up. This sector isn't going to go away. And I think this might be one of the sectors where you find there is a tremendous amount of new roles that haven't even been thought of and created yet that will start to exist, as it evolves. But the need will absolutely be there because people are going to need to be able to learn at all levels, whether that's more demand for changing curriculums in people learning from primary and secondary age all the way through to tertiary education, all the way through to, as you mentioned before,
mm,
short courses, micro skilling, all of these things. It's going to expand a lot more than what for most people was primary school, secondary school, um, formal trade qualification, or university degree. Like it's going to
yeah.
explode.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make there, James, because I think of those as like this, I guess the traditional stepping stones that we know certainly for education. And we've had the sort of, traditional way of moving through a career. It seems like everything's really kind of, if anything I'm seeing as a trend is that everything's kind of changing to be more non-linear. And as you said, the human skills are still so important, but then there's so many ways almost to apply these different journeys, and it's there's not necessarily an obvious journey anymore that you have to do ABC. You can kind of go from A to D and then come back to B when you fancy doing that.
Which is why it's the combination of where people can't see that journey for themselves. There's been this
Mm,
tremendous growth of coaching and requirement of
yes.
coaching to be able to support it. So again, it's just another component within this. So there's all of
Mm,
the skilling and You're absolutely right. More human skills than harder skills. There's still always going to be a need for hard skills to be trained, but more human
Yeah.
skills, but also more support for finding direction of travel, and being
Mm.
specific about what you want to learn. And then, like I said earlier, that will create opportunities and roles that we don't even consider today in this sector that will
Yeah.
start being created.
Yeah, there's no wonder every day for us is just such a joy because we're constantly learning and the journey's changing. So we're evolving with it.
Couldn't agree more.
Brilliant. Well, look, thanks again, as always, James, for your great insights. Really appreciate it, and very looking forward to seeing obviously what we get to next month in August. So look forward to seeing you then.
Wonderful. Look forward to it. Thanks, TJ.
Please have a great day.